Okay, forget everything you learned in history class, because the textbook narrative of the Scramble for Africa is a complete lie. We were always told it was about European pride, right? About politicians drawing lines on a map just to stroke their egos. Well, it wasn't. It was a heist, a cold, calculated, massively data-driven robbery. And today, we're looking at the exact numbers that prove it.
Section 1. History textbooks lied. Let's look at the real motive.
So, ask yourself the ultimate anti-common sense question. Why did Europe suddenly decide to carve up an entire continent? Why the 1880s? Why not 100 years earlier? Listen, this wasn't some random land grab. It wasn't a sudden burst of exploration. It was a highly targeted financial invasion, and the trigger was pure, unadulterated profit.
On one side, you have that dusty old textbook theory about political ego. Yeah, you can go ahead and throw that right out the window. Because on the other side is the cold, hard truth, pure, data-driven greed. Europe didn't invade to look strong on the global stage. They invaded because Africa was getting incredibly rich, incredibly fast, and they wanted to steal the wallet. Section 2. The bloody transition to commodities.
Here is exactly how this builds up. Step 1. The horrific transatlantic slave trade hits its absolute peak right around the 1790s. Step 2. Abolition efforts finally start drying up that violent human trafficking. But then, Step 3 happens. A massive pivot. Africa completely transitions its economy to exporting cash crops, and practically overnight, the continent turns into this huge, insanely lucrative commodity gold mine.
Look at this breakdown. By 1870, the top African exports weren't just random items. We're talking palm oil, ground nuts, gum. You see, Europe was industrializing rapidly at this time, and their massive factory machines literally needed African palm oil to stay lubricated. They absolutely couldn't survive without it. Africa had the goods, and Europe had a massive crippling dependency.
Section 3. The Data Slap. Uncovering the Hidden Windfall.
Now, past researchers used to just count raw export volumes and call it a day. But this new data tracks actual wealth. Researchers analyzed decades of historical export databases to calculate something economists call the net barter terms of trade. But let's drop the boring academic terms. We are really talking about real money-making power. It means calculating the absolute purchasing power of African goods, like exactly how many European industrial products could Africa actually buy with its palm oil and peanuts. The answer is staggering. African exports weren't just valuable, their fundamental worth was skyrocketing.
These numbers are a total slap in the face to common sense. Check this out. From 1845 to 1885, sub-Saharan Africa's real money-making power grew by a massive 2.42% every single year. The rest of the poor global periphery? They were crawling at barely 0.20%. Africa was getting richer faster than almost anyone else in the developing world. They were absolutely crushing the global average.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. This wasn't just some brief, lucky spike. This was a spectacular 40-year economic boom. Africa became immensely profitable. The continent was generating massive real wealth. And for the European empire sitting right next door, it simply became way too profitable to ignore. The trap was officially set.
Section 4. 1885. A totally calculated robbery.
Look at the timeline. 1845, the massive African price boom starts. Fast forward to 1879, and the French are aggressively surveying the Niger Delta, sniffing out all that wealth. Then, boom, 1885, the Berlin Conference. Europe officially carves up the map. And guess what else happens exactly in 1885? The African price boom hits its absolute highest mathematical peak. There is no way that's a coincidence. They invaded at the exact second of maximum profit.
The original source data provides hard, undeniable proof. Just look at the French exports right here. During the Scramble era, Africa made up over 70% of French colonial exports. 70%. This wasn't about international prestige. This was their absolute economic lifeline. Now, the researchers literally note that this boom peaked exactly at the date of the Berlin Conference, but they brush it off as a coincidence. Honestly, comparing the economic data with the historical timeline shows a massive flaw in that logic. You don't just accidentally invade an entire continent at the exact second its value peaks. The data screams that this was a highly calculated imperial heist.
Section 5. The Crash. Showing their true colors.
The aftermath was horrific. The second the takeover was complete, world prices for African goods totally collapsed. They just plummeted for decades. By 1940, the real purchasing power of sub-Saharan Africa had crashed all the way back to the levels of the year 1800. Think about that. 140 years of incredible economic progress totally wiped out in a flash.
And you can see this massive, sinister shift in tactics. Before 1885, prices were booming, and Africans naturally grew their exports to meet that demand. But after 1885, prices crash. So what did the colonizers do? They artificially forced the export volumes higher. They systematically squeezed a dying market just to keep their own profit margins up, all while the local producers starved.
How do you actually squeeze a crashing market? With brutal systemic extraction. Step 1. They built colonial railways specifically designed to drain resources out of the interior. Step 2. They rolled out massive forced labor camps. Step 3. They slapped on these crazy restrictive local taxes, meaning Africans were literally forced to work for the Europeans just to survive. It was pure systemic economic violence.
Section 6. The Unsolved Resource Curse. This is how the permanent trap was set. Step 1. Europe violently captures the market at its absolute peak. Step 2. Global commodity prices immediately crash. Step 3. Instead of letting Africa industrialize and adapt, the colonial powers deliberately locked the continent into exporting cheap, raw agricultural goods and minerals forever. They literally stopped African industry dead in its tracks.
It's a deeply tragic irony. On paper, sure, Africa's raw export volume actually soared during the colonial era. They were physically shipping out way more stuff than ever before. But their real wealth, the actual financial gain from all that labor, it was systematically siphoned straight to European capitals. The entire continent was drained dry just to build modern Europe.
So, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Is this calculated 19th century robbery the actual reason behind Africa's economic struggles today? We are constantly fed this narrative that Africa is just naturally underdeveloped, but this data shows something entirely different. They were overexploited. They were systematically robbed at the absolute peak of their wealth. Next time someone brings up global inequality, remember 1885. The data never lies. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.